Going to do a short pixel moment presentation by Christo.
Focus stacking is something I've played for a while, but during this lockdown down and stuck in my own house, I did a little bit of more effort on focus stacking. So I'll give you some introduction of focus stacking. First, I have a short outline. What is focus stacking? Then I have to say something about depth of field, just focused on focus stacking, because that is what focus stacking all around about. I'll show some examples of photos I took recently in my garden. I'll explain a little bit the procedure or the camera type of setup using, and then I'll give a short demonstration of some software, just as an indication how to do it. So focus stacking is actually, you take a lot of photos at different distances from the subject to enhance your depth of field. You will take a photo, move your focus a bit, take a photo, move your focus a bit, take a photo, or you can move the camera as well. Where do we mainly use focus stacking? There may be other examples as well. Scape photography, if you landscape, cityscape, seascapes, you actually want everything in focus, from your nice rock in front down to the mountains at the back. Focus stacking is quite an advantage to get everything in focus. Then food photography, to increase your depth of field. I think you've done a lot of food photography the last week or month, and it's difficult if you don't come right from the top to get everything in focus. Sometimes you want it not all in focus, but sometimes maybe make a menu for somebody, an interesting menu, you want everything in focus. Then of course product photography, if you take a photo of a product for somebody, they probably want the whole product in focus, not half of it. Jewelry is another thing. It's small things. It's difficult to get jewelry in focus. And then, of course, all close-up and macro photography, where you have a very limited depth of field. I'll show some examples. It's good to illustrate that way. Good. Just one important thing. Depth of field, the lens. Any optical system can only focus in one plane. It can't focus over a specific area. But if you as a viewer look at a photo, it seems that there's a region in front of the actual focus plane and behind the focus plane that looks for you as a viewer in focus. But if you zoom in enough, you'll see that it's actually out of focus. There's only one point in focus. Then looking at a lens opening, of course, we all know that a very large lens opening will give you a very short depth of field, and a very long, very small lens opening will give you a very large depth of field. So if you want to have something everything in focus, you most probably want a small f number, especially if you're close focusing. But there's a downside to very small f numbers. If you stop your lens down and down and down more, eventually the photos will become soft, and that's what we call diffraction. And it's a physics phenomenon. You can't change it. It's not something that happens immediately. It's just gradually getting softer and softer and softer. And most lenses are already a bit softer at f11, and they just get softer. So this is just what I use as a rule of thumb for a crop sensor. You don't go smaller than f13 to f16, full frame f16 to f22. And the higher number of pixels your camera have, the larger you need to be the lens opening. If you have a 50 megapixel camera, full frame f22 is going to look fairly soft already. And it also depends on your lens quality. Some lenses are better, some are worse, but all will have this diffraction. And it's important to notice that most lenses are at the sharpest between f5.6 and f8. So if you can do focus stacking, you can use your lens at its most sharpest f number. So you can shoot all your photos as f5.6 to f8, and then just stack them together to get everything in focus. So you will end up with a sharper picture. Of course, focal length. We all know for landscapes, we normally use a wide angle, but sometimes you want to zoom in a bit in your landscapes, and that's where you go to maybe a 50 or 70 millimeter lens, and then you start struggling with depth of field. You can't get the foreground, the middle ground, and the background all in focus, and then is where focus stack is actually working very nice. And then the focusing distance is quite important. Many of these close focusing, even if you take pictures of food, you normally focus fairly close and you have a very, very limited depth of field. And that is where you really start struggling. Because you can't use a wide angle lens, then there's just too much in the photo. Okay, I have one example here of focus stacking. This is a flower from today, yesterday, and tomorrow grow in my garden. The first photo you can see is only a little bit in focus here in front. Can you see the mouse, David? I showed
Yes,
the mouse.
yes, I see it.
The front. The second photo is more in focus in the middle. There, it's more or less the focus plane. The next one is more or less there, and the third one you can see is fairly or the fourth one is fairly at the back there. So what I've actually done is I've taken a lot of photos, and every single one is in a different plane. Now the final result looks something like that. I've used 28 photos here. I've moved the camera, in this case, 0.5 millimeter between each photo. I've used f8, which is fairly my sharp point on my lens. And I like to use natural light because everything then looks much more natural. And there's a magnification of about 1 times life size, which is not that difficult to achieve. Most macro lenses can do it. A 50 millimeter lens with extension tubes can get close to that. So it's not that difficult. But what you can see is you have a very, very nice photo now with everything in focus, except the little part at the back. To get that in focus as well, I probably need another 8 to 10 photos. This is another example. This is of a bug in my garden. This is 14 photos. I think I ended up with 14 photos, but eventually these things starts moving. There was a photo every 1/4 millimeter, again at f8, and this is about 2 times life size, and this is getting a bit more challenging. If you go beyond 1 times life size, it's really getting a bit more challenging, moving 1/4 millimeter at a time. Okay, how do I do this? The first thing is you put your camera on a tripod. You don't want it to move between all the photos. The best is to use manual exposure because you don't want every photo to be different exposed by the camera deciding for himself. If aperture priority works for you under constant light, it's fine, but manual exposure is normally working easier. Then don't use auto white balance, especially if you shoot in JPEG. If you end up with 20 photos with different white balances, I will not try to fix it for you. It's going to be a nightmare. So the best is to shoot in RAW, and then you can fix your white balance later if you forget to take your camera off auto white balance. The next point that's quite important is you start with your first photo at the back, the farthest end of what you want in focus. And then from there, you move to the front, either by turning the focus ring or by moving the camera lens. The reason for that is while you go closer, the photo is becoming bigger, the magnification is changing. But if you end up with a nice composition, by the time you get to the back of your subject, some of the flowers might start cutting off and things like that. That's something I've learned on a hard way, is start at the back and go to the front. What you then do is you move your focus a little bit. Some of the Wi-Fi cameras, you can do it by your cell phone in constant amounts. Take a photo and repeat the process until you have enough photos to have a complete in focus stack. The other thing I just want to mention, instead of changing the focus, you can also move the camera. That is sometimes easier for small subjects. If for large subjects like a large flower or a landscape or something like that, you can't walk in a landscape. You have to change the focus. But if you get to smaller subjects, it's sometimes easier to move the camera. Be a little bit aware of subject movement. If they move too much, it's unusable. But the software sort of compensate for movement and rotation. Software is quite good. I just want to, oh, sorry, this one. Why? I'll move it back. What you can, I'll just finish and then I'll just move this back and show it again. Photo stacking and landscape. A landscape is sometimes challenging because you only have one focus plane. What do you do with your landscape? If you have something in front, a nice rock or a nice tree, and it's fairly close to you, how do you get the back in focus as well? So you can focus on the front and say, okay, this is important, I want this in focus, mountains don't matter. The other option is you focus a third into the photo to get a compromise between the foreground and the background. Or you use a hyperfocal distance, which is actually, if you focus on the hyperfocal distance, everything from your focus level till infinity will in focus. You can get that by calculators on your phone, or you can focus in the back if the back is important to you. So it's always a compromise. So what you actually do with focus stacking is you take 3 photos for a landscape, and this is the same for product photography. You take 3 or 4 or 5. One photo in the front, another one about a third into your landscape, and one at the back. And you've put them together at the end, you will end up with a landscape or a seascape or a cityscape where everything is in focus. And sometimes you can even do this without a tripod. If you just take a photo, move your focusing point a bit, take a photo, you can even achieve this without a tripod. It's not that difficult. If you look at software, there's lots of software, and I've just mentioned a few, maybe other people will know of many other. You can do it in Photoshop. There is a focus stacking in Photoshop. You can also just, for a landscape, simply put them on 3 layers and erase the parts that you don't want. I've done that, and it's very easy with a soft brush. I don't like Photoshop for the more difficult stacking. For the more difficult stacking, Photoshop really don't do that good of a job. And it's very, very difficult to do some editing later and figure out which layers is there, which you can erase. I'm struggling, but somebody else can maybe do it better than I can. Combine ZP is a free one. I haven't tried that. Piccolo is another free one. I haven't tried that. Helicone is something that's been used quite a bit in the industry. The one I've been using for most of my stacking is Zerene Stacker. That's a link that David sent on, and it's very easy to work, and you can get very, very nice results with that. And another one is Infinity Photo Focus. And this software, most of them compensate for a little movement, a little rotation, as well as change in magnification, because as you take the stack, your magnification is changing all the time. So the good software will compensate for that. And so they will actually compensate for that. Then Photoshop, I'll try and just show how that is working. So it's quite easy. You go to File, Script, and then load files into Stack. Browse. I'll just pick a few of these. It's not that important. Okay. Okay. It is now actually loading all your layers directly into a stack. But you can also do this directly from Lightroom. Select them in Lightroom and just open them in Photoshop in a stack. And then you go to Edit. Now I have to select all of them first. Select all the layers and Edit. Auto Align. The Auto one is quite fine. Julle sal kom help my net gou 'n bietjie share weer volgende hierna. What you can now see, it moved a little bit. It's actually taking the edges and align the images. So you have all your images now aligned. Then we go to edit, auto blend, and select stack images and select the two bottom ones here and say OK. And that's all you have to do, and you will end up with a extra layer there, which is actually the stack of the in focus images. I'm not going to wait for this to finish now, otherwise it will take a few minutes. But we can just go on with the presentation. It's quite easy to get. I will share this information with David. So there is a recipe for the for how to do that. Okay, then the one I use that for more advanced stacking currently is the Zerene Stacker. Zerene Stacker, if you look on the website, it's the most amazing things I have achieved there under microscope and things. Zerene Stacker can stack up to 1,000 photos, can do TIFF and JPEG photos. TIFF files can be as big as 200 megabyte. I've tried some of these TIFFs, and if you have 30 or 40 of them, you really have to go and make coffee and eat some cake and things and wait. But the results are amazing. There's an editing tool which will show where you can actually fine tune your editing. It will do the auto brightness if all the images are not exactly the same. It will change the brightness a bit. I'm not sure how much, but it will change it a bit. There's two different algorithms that they stack, and you can do both or one, and then you can choose at the end which gives you the best results. There's a student, the amateur, and pro versions, and also a fourth one which is actually for single user home person. It's not for free, but it's if you go for the home version, it's still affordable. It's opening very, sorry, Evelyn, it's opening very easily. You only go and you say a new project, and then I'll just find the directory I'm looking for. And I'll just call this one, say, test, just for test purpose, and save it. Then I go file, add files. As easy as that. I just want to go to the other one. And I'll have these three images. The one is focused a bit in the front, this other one in the middle, and the one at the end. They're not perfect, but it's good for the demonstration. So I'll just open the files. Okay, there's my files. We can see this one is focused fairly in front. The second one, just wait for this to finish, is more in the middle. And the third one is more to the back. So to stack is quite easy. You just go to stack, you say align and stack. I'm only going to use the first one, P max, and you wait a bit. It shouldn't take too long. Okay, and there we have the photo of the three photos. What you can now do is you can go and say edit, start retouching, and then you get a retouch brush. If I want to change the photo on the right side with some information on the left side, I don't want this front part to be so sharp, I can just it's a bit slow now. You can just paint there and you see, take from this image and put it to this image. So it works very nice. If you have some, for instance, insect and it moves its feet a little bit, you can choose the right photo and paint it in there. Or there's an edge that's not perfect. You can choose from which photo you want to take, and you can just in it here. There's batch processing. If you have a lot of them to do, there's some options. preferences. If you look, you can how much you can shift in X, Y, scale, rotation, brightness. Everything is here. You can even get a plug-in for Lightroom for this. I think this is enough that people can play with this if they like further.